Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz, and it's early November, and I'm going to do the end of the year book tag. Now, I think this was originally invented, written, created, whatever, by Ariel Bissett, but it's one of those. It's like one of those BookTube staples, that comes round every year as things that mark the passing of the reading year, the BookTube year for us. So, I'm a little on the late side in doing it, but doesn't matter, does it? Who cares? So, fairly simple questions, and the first one is any books that you that you've started that you still need to finish this year. Now, some years often I have a sort of long, slow read going on. When I'm reading something like, Homer or Chaucer or whatever, I might spread it over 6 months or a year. I haven't got anything like that at the moment. I've actually sort of tidied up all those sorts of reads for this year already, before October. So, obviously, I have a couple of books I've started that I'm reading at the moment, which I will undoubtedly finish. One of them is The Years by Virginia Woolf, and this is a bit of an ending, finishing sort of activity, because this is the last one out of her major works of fiction that I haven't read, and so when I've read this, I'll have sort of completed my Virginia Woolf novels and novellas. Not the short stories, not all her non-fiction, but I'll be really satisfied. So, got to finish that. And the other one that I've started and I'm really enjoying is Theft by Abdulrazak Gurnah, the British Tanzanian author who's won the Nobel Prize a few years ago, and this is his most recent book. And so those are the two things I've got on the go. Question number 2. Do you have an autumnal book to transition into the end of the year? Well, as I say, I'm a bit on the late side. So I'm interpreting this instead as what kind of wintry reading have I got lined up to kind of get me into the winter reading atmosphere. And I have to say that, Victober in October is always sort of like a key turning point of the reading year for me, when I do sort of move into sort of, those things that you might want to read sort of on a cold winter's evening or even a cold winter's day, with a cup of tea and a rug on the sofa, and very indulgent. I love that. And the two things that I associate with winter reading are crime and Charles Dickens. And I don't think I'm that unusual in that. I'm obviously not, because there's always a lot of kind of crime and mystery related reading things happening at the end of the year, and I'm participating in one called Christie's Missing. I've done this for the last couple of years now, and that's to read an Agatha Christie book during the 11 days when she mysteriously sort of did a runner and disappeared, that were in like early December. And I'm going to be reading Five Little Pigs, which is one of her Poirot novels. One I may have read it years. I always find it hard with Agatha Christie to remember which I've definitely read, or not, when I've been reading them for, 50-something years. I would say that reading event it's had a few hosts, but the one who's sort of flying the flag and carrying it on this December is Gurnah, of Gurnah's Bookish Adventures, and I'll link to that below, because, why not read an Agatha Christie novel in early December? Surely we all want to do that, don't we? I specifically picked Five Little Pigs, though, because it's actually the choice of the FOMO book club that's run by Jack and Jem. I'll link to that as well. And it's like they knew what I wanted and picked that for me for the end of the year. As I say, I also associate Charles Dickens with the winter, and again, I suspect I'm not alone in that, because a couple of people are doing something that lends itself to supporting me in making sure I read some Dickens in November or December. So Katie of Books and Things is hosting a Victorian Christmas event, and got 3 sort of short stories or novellas to read. Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, but also 2 others which have been interesting. Mary Elizabeth Braddon's The Christmas Hirelings, and Thackeray's The Rose and the Ring, which I last read when I was a child. So, that will be fun. Also, there's another group, I think, led by Vin of Revenant Reads, but my good booktube friends Debs and Pat are also involved in that. And that's, what's it called? It's called Ghosts of Christmas Past. And it's saying read kind of Victorian or other ghost stories in at the end of the year, and so like Christmas Carol, but it doesn't have to be that one. Others, and there's a group read this year of The Signalman by Charles Dickens. So that will be my other definite Dickens in December, and That will have a nice wintry transition into winter feel for me. Now, I also always at this time of year have a bit of a sort of a Victober hangover when I think, I need to keep reading more big fat Victorian novels, and I didn't get to read a big fat Charles Dickens novel during Victober, so I would quite like to also transition into the winter by reading one or the other out of Dombey and Son or Barnaby Rudge, both of which are lovely big fat Dickens novels that I have never read. Obviously not both, but I hope one or the other, and they might well sort of transition with me into the new year. I can imagine, that nice time between Christmas and New Year when it's just perfect for reading, isn't it? And yeah, we'll see. So, question number 3 is there a new release that you're still waiting for, sort of between now and the end of the year? Well, yes, there is, but not quite in the sense that the question means, I think, because Helm by Sarah Hall was a new release at the very end of August, so, like 2 months ago, and I haven't yet read it, and I am waiting for it, but I'm waiting for it to become available for my reservation at the library, and I think I'm going to get it any day now and be able to read it between, in the next month. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to come back to saying something about Helm later on, so I won't say any more about that. The new release that's actually coming out in between now and the end of the year that I've got kind of on my radar is the 3rd book of the series by Solveig Balla, the Danish author, called On the Calculation of Volume. But I'm not going to read book 3. What I'm going to do at the time when book 3 comes out, which is actually the 18th of November, I'm going to read book 2 because I read book 1 earlier in the year and I'm looking forward to catching up with book 2, and then maybe I'll get to book 3 as well. Who knows? But yeah, I'm watching that new release date, but not necessarily reading the newly released book. I do have a new release in mind to read, but that doesn't come out until June of 2026, or no, May, end of May, in fact. And that is Cathedrals by Claudia Piñera, the Chilean writer. The original book came out in Spanish in 2020, but the English translation by Frances Riddle comes out at the end of May next year, and that's definitely very firmly on my radar. Along with we have a little Pinheiro project reading group on Voxer, and we're all sort of committed to picking that up together in June. So, question number 4. What are 3 books you want to read before the end of the year? Well, obviously, I've got more than 3 books I want to read before the end of the year, but this gives me a chance to talk about a couple of themes in the things that I want to read. Now, one is completing the year's cycle for Reading the Globe Contemporary, which I've been co-hosting with Katja of Page Turns with Katja. We're making some plans for next year to do a quarterly book rather than a monthly book, but you will hear more of that. But I just finished yesterday the November book, The Understory by Sanay Sangsuk. It's a Thai writer. Not too late to get this, read it, and join us in discussing it at the end of November or beginning of December. But the December choice, so the last one, which I obviously have to read as I'm co-host, is this one, Isabel Allende's The Wind Knows My Name, translated I think by Frances Riddle. It's always hard to find the translator in Isabel Allende books, I think because she probably is really closely involved in the translation, because obviously she speaks very fluent English, but there's something about having a translator as well. In fact, it does say translated from the Spanish by Frances Riddle, and it's a relatively recent release. When did it come out? 2023. Yeah, so that's a must. But what else do I want to read? What other things do I want to read before the end of the year? I'd say that there's two types of reading that I normally do quite a lot of that I've done less of this year. I'm not sure why. One of that is reading non-fiction. I mean, not like I haven't read any non-fiction, but I haven't read more than, say, one a month. And so I definitely want to get a bit more non-fiction in before the end of the year. One that I know I'm going to at least start, even if I don't finish, well, I hope to finish it, but it's another plonk thing, is Black and British, A Forgotten History by David Olusoga. If you're British, you may have just watched Celebrity Traitors and seen the lovely David on that, and just, you can't fail to be charmed by him. And he's got a new series coming out on television, because he's a historian that also, popularise the ideas, shares the ideas by making TV shows. And it's about the Empire, the British Empire. So reading this is going to go really well with watching that, and what fun. But the other thing that I haven't read as much of, much less than I usually would, is graphic novels or comics. And so I need to find a couple to read before the end of the year in order to not feel I've sort of failed to do that. But I haven't actually chosen. You could make a suggestion if you like. Maybe there's one that you've particularly enjoyed in the last year or so that you'd recommend to me. I always enjoy a graphic memoir, but I'm also up for, as I say, fiction too. I look forward to a recommendation or two, and I'll see what my library can help me with. Then, question number 5. Is there a book you think could still shock you and become your favourite book of the year? Well, obviously, I never decide what my favourite books of the year are until after the 31st of December, because, that would just be wrong. You never know, do you? But are there some that I'm going to read that I feel are definitely contenders? Well, one is Helm by Sarah Hall, which I mentioned as the sort of new release I'm waiting for from the library, that is. And it just sounds like such a Roz book, because it's historical fiction. It's kind of got an unconventional structure. The narrator is a wind, a named wind that just occurs in a particular part of the north of England. It covers a long sweep of history. It sounds like my sort of thing, doesn't it? So that's a possibility, I think, and I've heard such nice things about it. Another possibility is that in December, I'm buddy reading with Allan of Big Old Books and Classics, a Clarice Lispector novel that I haven't yet read, and that's The Besieged City. It was written in 1949, or published in 1949 in Portuguese, but the English translation came out in 1919. It's by Johnny Lorenz. Now, Clarice Lispector, the Brazilian novelist and writer, is one of my all-time favourite authors. So there's always a chance that a book by her that I haven't read might turn out to be a favourite book of the year. We shall see. Third possibility that could turn out, and I don't know, to be a favourite book of the year, is this one. Now, I'm going to mangle this poor author's name because he's Hungarian, but it's Laszlo. That's easy. Krasna Hawkeye, Hungarian author who just won the Nobel Prize for Literature, this year, 2020, 2025. And I've never read anything by him. And this is Satan Tango, which he was published in Hungarian when 1985. And this English translation by George Sirtes came out in 2012, I think, and was very much admired at the time. Now, I'd say, well, me and the Nobel Prize for Literature judges seem to be on the same wavelength at the moment. Because, last year, in the last few years, we've had Han Kang, which is, one of my favourite authors in translation. We had Olga Tokarczuk a few years ago. That's a favourite. Annie Ernaux, another favourite. What's the other one that I was thinking of that I really so enjoyed? Abdulrazak Gurnah, of course, the author of Theft that I'm reading at the moment. He recently won the Nobel Prize. So, I'm on a roll. Perhaps not John Foster, that wasn't so much, but, with the Nobel Prize winners. So, fingers crossed for this one. Although I've heard some also slightly scary things about this, that it's, a challenging book. But you know me, I'm always up for a challenge, and sometimes books that are a bit challenging, that you have to work at, turn out to be the books that I stay in my mind and hence get that kind of favourite book status. There we go. Then, last question number 6. Have you already started reading plans for 2026? Would you like to guess? Do you think I have? Yes, of course I have. You know me, I'm a inveterate planner. Planning and anticipating what I'm going to read is, one of the pleasures of my bookish life, along with reading the things and then talking about them to other people, including, you on BookTube. So obviously I'm planning. Any specific plans? I mentioned cathedrals, didn't I, for June. In January, I'm going to be reading Eden Glassy by Melissa Lukashenko. She's Ukrainian, Indigenous Australian sort of, and I'm really interested to read a book by that Australian author. Came out in 2013, I think, but I've heard it's been on my radar ever since, and I've got a few people who are up for reading that with me, the Pinero Project gang. What else? Obviously, I've already got a list of like a pile of possibilities for next year's Victober, because during Victober I hear about all the other things people are reading and think, I'd like to read one, I must read it. Yeah, I've got a whole bunch of plans. Probably the most specific personal plan for reading that I've got for 2026 is that I need to get going again on my scallywandling mission to read work by an author from every country in the world, because I kind of got stuck about a year ago with, like just 10 countries left, but they're all micronations or, island nation. It's really hard now to find a really good, a proper book or substantial work from those places that I can get hold of without ludicrous sort of expense. Having said that, I'm going to push myself to get back on that horse and see what I can do in 2026. So that's my end of the year kind of plans. Always love hearing about yours as well, or any comments that you have on my plans. And as I say, recommendations for graphic novels or memoirs or comics that I've got a good chance of being able to get hold of to read before the end of the year would be lovely.